Let's start the countdown. A Hat in Time is a colourful 3D platformer that feels like it came straight out of the early 2000s. It released during a time when platformers weren't exactly dominating the spotlight, and it kind of went under the radar, so despite strong reviews, it never quite reached the audience it deserved. If you missed the creativity and charm of classics like Spyro the Dragon or Banjo-Kazooie, then this is a really easy recommendation. Ad Infinitum is psychological horror mixed with World War I trauma, which already tells you this isn't exactly a relaxing evening game. It kind of slipped under the radar because it's slow, uncomfortable, and much more about atmosphere than action, so a lot of players bounced off it early. But if you like horror that gets under your skin, a genuinely creepy environment haunted by wonderfully scarring yet obscure PTSD, and a harrowing story told through the eyes of an ex-soldier, this one's definitely worth your time.
Come here. Turn around and cover your eyes.
Among the Sleep puts you in the role of a toddler experiencing the world through fear and imagination, showing how even the person you trust the most can become the villain. That alone makes it feel very different from most horror games. Its short length and slower pacing saw it overlooked by many people, but if you enjoy atmospheric horror that focuses on mood, storytelling and the unexpected, this one is well worth experiencing. Banished is a town-building game that sits visually somewhere between Stronghold and classic medieval strategy games, but stripped back to pure survival where one bad winter can wipe out your entire settlement. It never had the marketing or scale of the bigger strategy titles, so it quietly built a loyal following without ever going fully mainstream. If you enjoy slower, more thoughtful management games where success feels genuinely earned, then this is still one of the most rewarding in the genre.
Oh, it looks like they have the whole forest covered.
Blair Witch takes the found footage horror idea and turns it into a psychological experience focused on isolation, memory, and losing your grip on reality. It released to fairly mixed reviews, with many players expecting a more traditional horror game rather than something slower and more story-driven. But if you enjoy atmosphere, tension, and horror that plays with your perception rather than relying on constant scares, this one is well worth visiting. The Callisto Protocol is impossible to talk about without mentioning Dead Space, and that comparison ended up being both its biggest strength and its biggest weakness. Many players expected it to reinvent survival horror when in reality it focused on brutal close quarters combat and a cinematic presentation instead. It may not be the Dead Space successor people were expecting, but taken on its own merit, it's a far better horror game than its reputation suggests.
Gotcha! Quick! Get to the train station! Yeah, baby!
Choo Charles is built around a rather ridiculous notion, a giant spider train hunting you across an island, but it completely owns that concept and pulls it off surprisingly well. Its short length and simple structure meant many players dismissed it as a novelty rather than a full experience, but if you enjoy unique horror games with a strong atmosphere and just enough tension to keep you on the edge, it's far more memorable than its premise might suggest.
Hanson, one more thing. Yeah? You need to...
Cold Fear is a classic survival horror set aboard a ship, and it feels like a forgotten cousin to Resident Evil 4. Releasing around the same time as bigger horror titles meant it was quickly overshadowed, despite doing some genuinely interesting things with physics and environmental danger. But if you miss slower, more methodical survival horror with a strong atmosphere, then this is an easy one to go back and appreciate now, even despite the aging graphics of an older system.
What the hell is that?
Curse: The Eye of Isis is a classic early 2000s survival horror game that clearly takes inspiration from Resident Evil and Fatal Frame, but sets its story aboard a cursed train filled with supernatural threats. It released with clunky controls and technical issues, which meant it never really escaped its rough first impression at the time, but the PC version is still perfectly playable today. If you enjoy old school survival horror and don't mind a little bit of roughness around the edges, there's a surprisingly charming experience here. Daymare 1998 began life as a fan remake of Resident Evil 2 before Capcom shut the project down, forcing them to turn it into an original survival horror game instead. That origin explains a lot because it deliberately leans into old school design with nods to Resident Evil series throughout, and a focus on tension, limited resources and slower pacing rather than modern action. Its rough edges meant it received mixed reactions at launch, but if you miss classic survival horror, then there is a lot here worth appreciating.
No, this isn't real. This isn't happening.
What about my head?
Perhaps you should take a look for yourself.
What the fuck?
Deadhead Fred is one of the strangest and most creative games to come out of the PSP era, and quite honestly the video game era full stop.
Now are you gonna tell me, or are you just gonna stand there like a fucking stump?
Voiced by John C. McGinley from Scrubs, it blends noir detective storytelling with dark adult humour and a unique mechanic that lets you swap heads to gain different abilities, while searching for your real one stolen from you by the antagonist Ulysses S. Pitt. It was released quite late in the PSP's life and never found the audience it fully deserved, and although a sequel was mentioned, it never came to fruition. Imagine LA Noire meets Spyro the Dragon meets Resident Evil, and there's still nothing quite like it to this day.
My name is Spade, by the way. Sam Spade. And you are?
Fred. Just Fred.
Deliver at All Costs is a physics-driven delivery game that feels like pure controlled chaos. Destruction Derby meets Death Stranding. Getting the package to its destination matters far less than what you accidentally destroy along the way. Its over-the-top presentation and arcade-style design may have been off-putting to serious gamers, despite how immediately fun and different it feels to play. But if you enjoy games that prioritise creativity and moment-to-moment chaos over realism, this is an easy one to lose hours in.
He's rented a brand new limo, and he wants you to be their driver for the day. After all, no one knows how to kiss up to their superiors better than you.
Dr. Muto is a weird and wacky platformer from the early 2000s that feels very much out of the Crash Bandicoot and Ratchet and Clank era. It fully embraces its mad science premise as you transform into different creatures to solve puzzles and explore its strange worlds. It was released during a crowded period for platformers and never quite stood out above the rest, despite how creative its ideas were. Don't let that cloud your judgment though, this experimental platformer wasn't afraid to be a little messy in pursuit of being a little different. This is well worth a playthrough, even a quarter of a century after its original release.
Don't touch it.
Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is a slow, story-driven experience set in a quiet English village where the story unfolds through fragments of conversations, memories, and abandoned places rather than traditional gameplay. Many players dismissed it as a walking simulator upon its release, but that slower pace is exactly what gives the world its weight and sense of loss. If you were willing to slow down and simply exist in its world for a while, it's still one of the most haunting and beautifully told stories of its generation.
It's out in the world, it's adapting and spreading. Do you understand?
No, we can't turn it away. It's come too far.
Okay, people are disappearing. Shut it down now.
No!
Evil West feels like Call of Duty meets Rage, but with vampires, Wild West weapons, and a lot more gore. It's a fast, brutal action game that focuses almost entirely on combat, throwing waves of enemies at you and letting you deal with them in increasingly ridiculous ways. That old school, linear design meant it was easy to overlook when it was released alongside bigger open world games, but if you miss tightly focused action games that just want you to have fun and go absolutely insane, this is far better than it was given credit for. The Exit 8 is built around an incredibly simple idea: walking through a looping underground passage and spotting anything that feels wrong before it's too late. There's no combat or traditional objectives, just tension created through small changes and the constant feeling that something isn't quite right. Even though the anomalies can't actually harm you and only reset your progress, the game still creates a strong sense of vulnerability through uncertainty alone. Its simplicity meant many people overlooked it as a short novelty game. But if you enjoy games built around observation, atmosphere, and quiet psychological tension, this is one of the most strangely compelling experiences in recent years. Expeditions, a MudRunner game, takes the slow, methodical driving of the MudRunner series and turns it into something more focused on exploration and problem solving, rather than simply getting from point A to point B. Progress comes from planning routes, managing terrain, and carefully navigating environments that feel actively hostile to your vehicle. Its deliberate pace and refusal to hold your hand meant it never had the same broad appeal as faster racing games, but if you enjoy games built around patience, planning, and overcoming the environment itself, this is a surprisingly rewarding experience. Fatal Frame Maiden of Blackwater is a survival horror game built around vulnerability, where your only way to fight back is by photographing ghosts as they move closer towards you. The constant rain and water-soaked environments give the game a heavy, oppressive tone that feels very different from Western horror, forcing you to face danger directly rather than run from it. Originally released only in Japan, it remained overlooked for years until its modern release finally brought it to a wider audience. If you enjoy horror that creates tension by making you confront your threats head-on without traditional weapons, then this is one of the most unique survival horror experiences out there.
This'll save me a trip to the ATM.
Futurama is one of those rare licensed games that actually worked. With writing and voice acting handled by the original cast and creators, it was released late in the PlayStation 2's lifecycle and was overshadowed by bigger platformers at the time, which meant many people never got a chance to play this gem. If you enjoyed The Simpsons Hit and Run, this feels like its sci-fi cousin, mixing humour, simple action and exploration in a way that captures the spirit of the show surprisingly well. If you can get over the steep difficulty spike early on, then it's still far better than most TV tie-in games ever managed to be. Get Even is one of those games that honestly sounds dull when you try to describe it, but makes far more sense once you actually play it. It blends psychological thriller elements with exploration and fragmented memories, using shooting more as a tool for progression rather than traditional combat, while its binaural audio design creates a constant sense of unease as voices and sounds feel uncomfortably close. Its unusual structure meant it confused a lot of players at release, but if you enjoy games built around atmosphere, mystery, and slowly piecing things together, this is far more interesting than it first appears.
What are you doing? No, don't touch me!
Something's coming.
Ghostwire Tokyo is an atmospheric horror action game where supernatural abilities replace traditional weapons as you fight against spirits and urban legends drawn from Japanese folklore. Many players expected a full survival horror experience at launch, but the game leans more into exploration and atmosphere, letting you slowly uncover the city's stories at your own pace. If you enjoy games with strong world building, impressive graphics and a super unique combat system, then this is far more interesting than its mixed reception initially suggested. Gunsmith Simulator sounds incredibly niche on paper, and much like Power Wash Simulator, it's the kind of game that seems boring until you actually start playing it. Instead of action, the focus is on restoring, repairing and customizing firearms piece by piece, turning each job into a slow, methodical puzzle. That deliberate pace meant it never had a broad appeal outside of simulator fans, but if you enjoy relaxing, system-driven games where satisfaction comes from doing things properly, this is far more engaging than it first appears.
Oh, did that thing just spit all
Finally!
over you?
Oh my god, finally I'm free, thank god! What a nightmare!
High on Life is a first-person shooter built almost entirely around its humour.
Oh boy, here we go, fucking kid.
Created by Justin Roiland, the co-creator and voice behind Rick and Morty, which should immediately give you an idea of the tone. The talking weapons and constant dialogue divided players at launch, as that style of humour definitely isn't for everyone, but underneath it is a surprisingly solid and creative shooter. If the comedy clicks with you, this ends up being one of the more memorable and genuinely different shooters released in recent years, and it's short enough that it never outstays its welcome. That said, I am honestly a little skeptical that a sequel will be able to live up to what made the first game stand out.
Time for an important question. Would you like to keep me on as your permanent in-suit advisor? That was the best choice you could have made. All right, bye-bye now. I'll be back a bunch.
Homefront: The Revolution is an open-world shooter set in Philadelphia, built around guerrilla warfare and slowly pushing back against a stronger occupying force. At launch, it received some harsh reviews due to technical issues and frame drops, and it was frequently compared rather unfairly to Far Cry, which meant many players dismissed it for not matching those expectations. But taking on its own terms, its scrappier combat, weapon conversions, and focus on building resistance over time make it a far more interesting and rewarding experience than it was actually given credit for. House Flipper is one of those games that sounds incredibly mundane on paper, cleaning houses, knocking down walls and redecorating rooms, but somehow turns it into something strangely addictive once you start playing. It quietly built a huge audience thanks to that simple satisfaction loop, even spawning a sequel, even though many people initially dismissed it as just another simulator. But if you enjoy these simulator games where the appeal comes from switching your brain off and slowly improving something piece by piece, this is far more relaxing and rewarding than it has any right to be. Kona 2 Brume is a slow, atmospheric detective story set in a freezing northern mining town as you try to understand what's happening beneath the surface. Much of the experience is built around isolation, navigating snowstorms, abandoned buildings, and long stretches where the environment itself feels like the main threat. Its deliberate pacing and lack of hand-holding meant it never reached a wide audience, but if you enjoy mystery games that let you explore, observe, and piece things together at your own pace, this is a quietly immersive experience that's really easy to overlook. Lit Bend the Light is a minimalist puzzle game built around manipulating beams of light using mirrors and reflections, turning simple ideas into increasingly clever challenges. It has that same satisfying feel as games like Pipe Mania or Mini Motorways, where the enjoyment comes from watching a simple solution slowly come together. It might even remind you of the puzzle games you'd lose hours playing on the iPod Touch back in the late 2000s. And if you enjoy mechanics-first puzzle games, this is a small but genuinely rewarding experience. Maneater is an open-world action game where you play as a shark on a revenge mission against Scaly Pete, the hunter who killed your mother. The game is built around moving through new regions, evolving your abilities, and gradually becoming stronger as you climb up the food chain, giving it a light RPG-style sense of progression. It's almost like Finding Nemo meets Assassin's Creed in a way. Its over-the-top premise meant some players dismissed it as a novelty, but if you're willing to embrace it, it's a surprisingly addictive action fantasy game that knows exactly what it wants to be. MediEvil follows the wonderfully useless Sir Daniel Fortescue, a skeletal knight accidentally resurrected to defeat the evil sorcerer Zarok, and finally become the hero he always pretended to be. Its gothic art style, dark humour and slightly clunky combat meant it never quite reached mainstream success, despite leaving a lasting impression on players who grew up with it. Somehow, the game has been remade twice, yet it's still treated like an undercover cult classic. But if you enjoy quirky action adventures with real personality, then it's well worth revisiting. The Mortuary Assistant is a horror game built almost entirely around atmosphere and routine, as you carry out embalming procedures while slowly realising that something is not quite right. Much of the tension comes from how grounded everything feels, turning ordinary tasks into something deeply uncomfortable as subtle supernatural events begin to creep in. Its slow pace and niche market meant it flew under the radar for many players. Death is uncomfortable after all. But if you enjoy horror that relies on dread and uncertainty rather than constant jump scares, this is one of the most unsettling experiences you can have.
You did this to me. It's all your fault.
think you need to see this.
Oddworld Soulstorm is a much darker, more ambitious reimagining of Abe's Exodus, expanding the original idea into something far more cinematic and emotionally heavy. Its punishing difficulty and major gameplay changes divided many fans at launch, especially those expecting a straightforward remake, but taken on its own terms with its strong atmosphere and world building, this is a bold and uncompromising entry into the series that deserved far more patience than it actually received.
Hey, but I don't know how you did it, but unbelievable!
I tell you, he knows how to drive a train.
He swiped the manuals out of shipping years ago. He's been reading them ever since.
I'll shadow you. Let's go.
The Order 1886 is a cinematic third-person shooter set in a wonderfully realised steampunk version of Victorian London, where atmosphere and world building take priority over scale. Its shorter length and slower pacing meant many players finished it expecting more, but what's here is incredibly focused with some of the strongest visuals and presentation of its generation. If you approach it as a tightly told, story-driven experience rather than a traditional action game, it's far easier to appreciate just how unique it actually is.
All devices off.
Pac-Man World Re-Pac is a remake of one of the more surprising platformers of the early 2000s, turning a character known for arcade games into a genuinely solid 3D adventure. Its simple design and family-friendly presentation meant it didn't get much attention compared to bigger platformers, but underneath that is a tightly designed game that still holds up remarkably well. If you grew up with the PlayStation 1 era platformers, or just miss straightforward colourful games that know exactly what they want to be, then this is an easy recommendation to just sit down and enjoy today. Planet Zoo is a management simulator that goes far deeper than simply building enclosures, focusing heavily on animal behaviour and psychology, conservation, and creating habitats brick by brick, leaf by leaf, and inch by inch that actually feels alive. Its complexity and slower pace meant it appealed more to dedicated simulation fans rather than a wider audience. There is a campaign mode, but most of your time will be spent building a dream zoo from scratch, with over 100 species of animals and more added regularly. This is one of the most detailed and satisfying management games released in recent years.
Is our great Caldera Safari Park. It's been quite a small operation until now, but we've just been donated some land. And so, like my waistline at Thanksgiving, we're gonna expand.
I met this girl on my way here. What are you doing? I'm gonna get her moving.
Quantum Break is a time manipulation shooter that sees firefights constantly interrupted by frozen explosions, shifting timelines, and choices that directly affect the live-action episodes between chapters. That strange mix of game and TV series didn't sit well with a large number of players at launch, but it gives the story a scale and pacing that feels very different from a traditional shooter. For better or for worse, this is an ambitious experimental project that feels far more interesting now than it did at release.
Take it easy, Mr. Zellner. You will only hurt yourself. Shall we begin?
The The Raven Remastered is a classic point-and-click adventure inspired by old Agatha Christie-style mysteries, following a train robbery investigation that slowly unravels across multiple perspectives. It feels very much in the same vein as Sherlock Holmes or Broken Sword, focusing on dialogue, observation, and carefully piecing together clues rather than fast-paced action. Its slower pace meant it went largely unnoticed at release. But if you enjoy traditional detective stories, this is a quietly satisfying mystery that deserves far more attention than it actually got.
Yeah, and without saying goodbye either.
Remember Me is a third-person action game set in a beautifully stylized future Paris, built around the idea of memories being altered and rewritten to change how people see the world. In some ways it feels like an early cousin to Control, prioritizing atmosphere, world building, and strange sci-fi ideas over perfect combat. Its gameplay drew mixed reactions at launch, but the setting, soundtrack, and memory remix sequences gave it an identity that felt genuinely different. If you enjoy story-driven sci-fi built around big ideas, then this is an ambitious game that feels far more interesting now than it did on its release.
So noble an idea.
No, Charles. From the very beginning, it was a bad idea.
Remnant from the Ashes is often described as Dark Souls but with guns, however that comparison doesn't quite capture what makes it work. Built around tough but fair combat, randomly generated areas, and bosses that genuinely force you to adapt, it blends third-person shooting with progression in a way that feels surprisingly fresh. It was released without much fanfare and quietly built a loyal following over time, but whether you're playing solo or with friends, if you enjoy challenging action games with real replay value, then this is one of the better choices. Resident Evil Revelations 2 sits somewhere between classic survival horror and the more action-focused era of Resident Evil, combining resource management and exploration with cooperative gameplay that feels surprisingly well balanced. Its episodic structure was seen by some as a barrier to entry, but the dual campaign, including Barry Burton's storyline, gives fans a deeper look at those often considered some of the series' best side characters. If you enjoy Resident Evil when it leans back towards tension and atmosphere without fully abandoning action entirely, then this is the perfect mix, and it's one of the most underrated entries in the entire franchise.
Ja, ich auch. Ich hab keine mehr. Dann hol welche. Jetzt! Oder du kannst eine Vogel.
The Saboteur is an open-world action game set in Nazi-occupied Paris, where large parts of the city begin in black and white and slowly regain colour as you liberate districts from the enemy control, something never really seen before in video games. And that visual style combined with stealth and open-ended objectives, it gave it a strong identity that set it apart from other open-world games at the time. It was released alongside bigger titles and was really easy to overlook. But if you enjoy stylish open-world games with a clear sense of progression and fantastic art direction, then this one definitely deserves another look.
You smell that salty sea air, Scoob? You know what that means, buddy. Yeah. Seafood! Fried clams! Runa fish! Cracked crabs! Runa salad! Jumbo shrimp! Runa sushi!
Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights is one of those early 2000s licensed games that turned out far better than anyone expected, blending light platforming with a surprisingly large interconnected world full of puzzles and backtracking. It feels closer to Spyro or Crash Bandicoot than a typical children's game, which helps it stand out at the time. Overshadowed by bigger platformers of the era, it quietly became a cult favourite, and if you grew up with PS2 adventure platformer games, this is still a genuinely fun and nostalgic experience worth revisiting at least once. Serious Sam 4 is a throwback first-person shooter that completely ignores modern trends, throwing massive enemy hordes at you across wide open arenas, and focusing purely on fast movement and constant action. Its rough edges and deliberately old-school design led to mixed reviews at launch, especially compared to more cinematic shooters, but that simplicity and constant flow is exactly the appeal. If you miss shooters that prioritise speed, scale, and arcade-style gameplay over realism, then this is an unapologetic return to that era. Silent Hill F stands out immediately for shifting the series away from its usual American setting into rural Japan, blending traditional Silent Hill psychological horror with a very different cultural atmosphere and visual identity. Its change in direction divided some long-time fans early on, but that willingness to do something different gives it a tone that feels fresh for the series. It definitely delivers on the mood and the grotesque visual storytelling it hinted at pre-release. This was one of the more interesting directions Silent Hill has taken in many years. Singularity is a first-person shooter built around time manipulation, letting you age, restore or decay objects and enemies in the middle of combat and puzzles. Released during a crowded period for military shooters, it was easy to overlook, despite its strong sci-fi setting and genuinely creative mechanics. It feels somewhere between Bioshock and Half-Life, blending story-driven moments with experimental gameplay mechanics, and if you enjoy shooters that try something just a little bit different, then this is the one for you. Split Second is an arcade racing game built around spectacular visuals, filling every race with explosions and collapsing buildings and a huge set pieces that become part of the track itself. It feels like an homage to the Burnout series while still being its own thing. It still rewards aggression over clean racing and constantly tempts you to take risks. Released during a time when racing simulators began to dominate the market, it never quite found the audience it deserved. But if you miss those arcade races that prioritise excitement above everything else, then this is one you should absolutely add to your list. Slitterhead is a strange blend of horror and action from the creator of Silent Hill, built around possession mechanics that let you jump between different characters to fight and survive against grotesque creatures. Its unusual structure and experimental ideas meant it divided opinion at launch, especially for players expecting traditional survival horror. But if you enjoy games that prioritise weird concepts and bold ideas over polish, then this is a fascinating and deeply unconventional experience that stands out for simply trying something different. Soma is a sci-fi horror game that focuses far less on jump scares and far more on exploring identity, consciousness, and what it really means to be human. Its slower pacing and heavy narrative focus meant some players overlooked it, expecting a more traditional horror experience. But the stories and themes leave a lasting impression long after the game ends. It feels somewhere between Dead Space and Amnesia, combining sci-fi isolation with psychological horror to create one of the more thought-provoking experiences in the genre.
Nice.
5 innocent people are dead because these 2 animals couldn't control themselves.
I get it. We're meant to choose.
Spec Ops: The Line looks like a typically military shooter on the surface, but it quickly turns into something far darker, using the genre itself to deliberately unsettle the player and challenge their actions. Rather than feeling heroic, the story gradually becomes uncomfortable, forcing you to question what you're doing and why you're doing it. A bit like how Call of Duty World at War portrayed World War II as brutal rather than glorious. Its heavy themes divided opinion, but few shooters leave the same kind of psychological weight behind once it's over, making this one of the more memorable and disturbing experiences the genre has ever produced.
Maybe if you understood the hell you put these people through. Set them up.
Walker, over here. We've got to save these civilians.
Now's our chance, Walker. We got an open path straight to Gould.
What about the civilians? We gotta save them.
Look, I know it sucks, but Gould's vital to our mission. The civvies aren't.
Our mission is to rescue people.
Had the bucket turned out to be correct? Was it? No, never mind. The bucket was wrong. Stanley took the door on his left to go back to the meeting room.
No,
said the bucket.
The Stanley Parable is less a traditional game and more an experiment in choice, narration, and player expectation, constantly reacting to and commenting on whatever you decide to do. It breaks the fourth wall almost constantly, using its narrator to question your decisions and even the idea of choice itself.
But at last, he'd had enough of the amazing room.
In some ways, it shares that self-aware humour with High on Life, but here it's used to explore storytelling and player psychology rather than just comedy. If you enjoy games that play with the structure and surprise you at every turn, this is one of the more clever and memorable experiences in modern gaming.
To have a point. It was meant to speak to the human condition. But where are the jokes? Where are the jokes? They bemoaned, they screamed, they gnashed their teeth and said, entertain us. It wasn't enough. They had to leave a pathetic little thumbs-down review and make all of their pitiful demands. But then, he's talking too much, they said. First, he didn't entertain us.
Stuntman Ignition is a driving game built entirely around precision, asking you to recreate film stunts perfectly whilst cameras roll and explosions go off around you. Its difficulty and trial and error structure meant it frustrated a lot of players, especially with the reverse U-turn in the later stages. But that's exactly what makes the game feel so satisfying once everything finally comes together. If you enjoy games built around mastering short challenges and chasing the perfect run, this is a unique and rewarding experience that never really got the attention that it deserved. Them and Us is a survival horror game that deliberately leans into the design of classic Resident Evil. With limited resources and slow, methodical exploration, its rough presentation and indie budget meant players overlooked it at release, but underneath that is a clear love for old school survival horror design. It brings the fixed camera style of the original Resident Evil trilogy together with more modern visuals, carrying that classic formula into the 21st century. If you miss the tension that comes from careful movement and managing every single bullet, this feels like a genuine throwback to the genre before action became the main focus. Titanfall 2 is one of the best first-person shooters of the last decade, blending fast, fluid movement with a genuinely mind-blowing single-player campaign. It's got no right being this good. It constantly introduces new ideas and mechanics before moving on to the next. Unfortunately, its release between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare meant it was overlooked by many players at the time. But between the creative level design, tight gunplay and the relationship between pilot and Titan, it's a game that stands head and shoulders above most modern story-driven first-person shooters.
BT, Cooper, what's your status? Cooper, how copy? Over. Cooper, this is Commander Sarah Briggs. If you could read...
Trackmania Turbo is an arcade racing game built around speed, precision and mastering tracks until every movement feels effortless. The controls are incredibly fluid, arguably some of the best you'll find in an arcade racer ever, making every reset feel instant and responsive rather than frustrating. Combined with some of the most creative and unpredictable track designs you'll ever see, it becomes less about racing opponents and more about chasing the perfect time. If you enjoy pure arcade driving and genuinely challenging target times, this is one of the more addictive racing games that's available.
Another token for my collection.
Uncharted: The Lost Legacy started life as a smaller standalone expansion, but ended up becoming one of the tightest and more focused entries in the series. By shifting the spotlight away from Nathan Drake and onto Chloe Fraser and Nadine Ross, and setting the adventure in India, something rarely seen in major 3D adventure games, it gave the story room to breathe whilst keeping the cinematic set pieces and exploration the series is known for. It's often overshadowed by the 4 mainline games, but if you enjoy Uncharted at its most refined and focused, this is one of the strongest adventures that series has ever produced.
So that's a no. Felt like a no.
You've got balls. I like that. But I don't need any more so-called experts. Shoot them. Throw their bodies in the river.
No need. We'll throw ourselves out.
After them! Through the window!
Come on! We need to get across the river!
These people want me dead. I need to leave now.
Here's the leech. Here!
Vampire is an action RPG set in the plague-ridden London where every decision you make directly affects both the story and the people living within the city. As a doctor turned vampire, you're constantly balancing the need to feed with the consequences of who you choose to feed from, giving the game a moral compass that few RPGs attempt. Its slower pacing and rough combat meant it received mixed reactions at launch, but if you enjoy story-driven games built around choice and consequence, this is a deeply memorable experience that deserves far more attention.
The drain must have punctured the intercostal artery. There's too much blood.
Are you all right, Doctor?
I can't see.
Visage is a psychological horror game set almost entirely inside a single house, where progress comes from slowly uncovering its history whilst never leaving you feeling truly safe. The comparisons to PT are unavoidable, from the looping environments and shifting layouts to the way the game builds fear through silence and uncertainty rather than constant threats. Its deliberate pacing and lack of tutorial meant it wasn't for everyone, but if you're looking for horror that focuses on sustained dread and psychological tension rather than jump scares, this is one of the closest experiences we've had. A reminder of what can be created when developers tried to carry forward the twisted ideas that PT lost along the way.
What's up with you? Oh, you've been seeing things, you say? Things, Things like that? Don't you worry, my friend. Just take a sip.
O-M-H-A-P-P-Y to the F-R-E-E, F-R-E-E to the S-A-V-E-D, S-A-V-E-D from the bonds of S-I-N.
We Happy Few is a survival adventure set in a retro-futuristic Britain where society survives by taking a drug called joy, forcing everyone to remain artificially happy whilst the world quietly falls apart around them. Beneath its colourful presentation, the game works as a social commentary on mental health, escapism, and a society more interested in suppressing problems than confronting them.
Now, what's all the scuffle?
Its procedural elements and rough launch led to mixed reactions upon release, but the setting and ideas gave it an identity that stuck with players who gave it a chance. If you enjoy story-driven games with unusual worlds and darker themes buried beneath the surface, this is a far more interesting game than its reputation would suggest.
You're the last bloody person who should be off his joy.
I can't believe you are.
Believe me. Take enough stuff. Look. Some downer broke into my lab last week, literally tore the bars off the windows, and the ridiculous thing is I forgot to lock the front door. Point is, it's a horrible, terrible world out there. I just don't see you smashing your way into the city without a great deal of help.
White Day, a labyrinth-named school, is a Korean survival horror game set entirely inside a school overnight, where you're completely defenseless and forced to hide rather than fight back. Much of the tension comes from unpredictable enemy patrols and the constant feeling that you're never truly safe, making it even simple exploration stressful. It feels like a combination of Outlast and Silent Hill, blending vulnerability and psychological horror with a heavy focus on atmosphere and exploration. If you enjoy horror that relies on tension and uncertainty rather than combat, this is one of the more unsettling experiences the genre has to offer. "13" is a cel-shaded first-person shooter based on the graphic novel of the same name, built around comic book visuals, stylized action, and a conspiracy-driven story that constantly keeps you guessing. The remake itself had a very rough launch and drew criticism for missing what made the original special, but later updates helped bring it closer to what the fans expected. Underneath that rocky start is still a unique shooter with a visual style that stands out even today. If you enjoy those kind of shooters with strong identity and visual presentation, this is still worth experiencing despite its troubled release. Zombie is a survival horror game set in a collapsed London, built around the idea that survival should feel uncomfortable rather than empowering. Combat is slow and deliberate, resources are limited, and managing your backpack in real time means even simple encounters can go very wrong very quickly. When you die, your previous character remains in the world carrying all your gear, turning every mistake into a risk-reward decision. In some ways, it feels like the Walking Dead survival instinct, but actually good. I'll recommend this to anyone who prefers tension, vulnerability, and survival over action. And that's 60 underrated masterpieces that aren't talked about nearly enough. If you made it this far, genuinely thank you for watching. I know videos like this are a little bit of a marathon, but if you discovered a game that you've never heard of before, let me know which one in the comments, because I'm always curious what people end up adding to their backlog. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribing really does help the channel grow, and it helps me make more deep dives and lists like this in the future. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.